Hey everybody, welcome back to Library Says. My name is Jamie, and today I am going to talk about the 12 books I read in March. Now, last month I decided to go in rating order, starting with the worst books of the month and building up to my favorite books of the month, and I planned on doing that again in March, but I've decided instead to go chronologically because there is obviously a pattern to my reading that you will catch on to because of coronavirus and everything that's going on and being self-isolated and whatnot. And I think the chronology of my reading tastes over the month is going to be more interesting than my ratings. So I'm going to start with the very first book I read in March, and that was Wild at Heart by K.A. Tucker. This is the sequel to The Simple Wild, which came out last year, 2 years ago, and is a contemporary romance about a woman who goes to Alaska to take care of her sick dad, who she's never really had much of a relationship with. She is from Toronto. That's where she lives with her mom and her stepdad. She's a blogger. She's very into fashion, and her dad is very rough and tumble, living in this small town in remote Alaska, and he owns a charter plane company. Well, she strikes up this sort of hate-filled relationship with one of her father's employees, and it is hate-love and very interesting. Well, that book ends pretty solidly. Everything was wrapped up neatly enough, and I was really pretty shocked when I heard there was going to be a sequel. So I went into this thinking like, is this necessary? I really liked it a lot. We start off with this couple, Kala and Jonah. He's shown up at her doorstep in Toronto, and they basically agree to continue to try their relationship, and she's going to move with him back to Alaska. They're going to give it a shot. If she's completely miserable, then they'll move back to the city. But her job can be transported to Alaska. He is a pilot, and he flies supplies to these remote native villages, and he does search and rescue and all sorts of things that he needs to be in Alaska for. So they're gonna try Alaska. They build a home in another remote town. There's a whole new cast of very interesting, quirky characters, including a curmudgeonly next door neighbor who Kala very reluctantly bonds with over the course of the book. There's a lot of adventure, and if you're into survivalist sort of stories and you like to live vicariously through books, this is a good one because this is unlike anything I have ever personally experienced, and I've never been to Alaska, but one can dream. And as far as the relationship goes, I was pleasantly surprised because they are an established relationship for this entire book. So you think it might get stale or dull, but it didn't. But there is plenty of tension and plenty of uncertainty and a lot of questions that still need to be answered. And it kept things very interesting, and I was engaged, and I loved them so much. Like, they are So if you haven't read The Simple Wild already, read that, then read this. If you have read The Simple Wild and you were like me and you were sort of like, oh, why is there a sequel? Read it anyway. I was so pleased with this, and I gave it 4 stars. The next book I read in March is Sense and Sensibility by Jane Austen. This is the first of my Jane Austen rereads. I'm rereading all of them over the course of this year. I don't want to go into too much because I'm going to do a video only on my rereads of Jane Austen's books, but I will say that I was a little cautious going into this one because I didn't remember a whole lot about how I felt about the book because I've seen the movie so many times since the last time I read the book, and this was also my first time listening as an audiobook. But Rosamund Hodge is an incredible narrator, and I was super engaged with the story. It starts out really strong, the development of the characters, the sisters, their relationships with their mother and their neighbors and their family, and I will say the middle bit was a little dull. I just wanted to keep going and pick back up with the plot. And that's the only reason I didn't give this a perfect 5 stars. I did not. But then we hit the climax, and I was just hooked. I was just completely gripped by it, which is excellent because you never know going into a classic, especially one that you've read once upon a time, but it's been many years and you don't really remember. You always worry, is this really gonna be engaging? I was so pleased at how much I enjoyed this one, and I gave it 4 stars. Next up, I read The River by Peter Heller. This is an action-adventure thriller about 2 best friends who are on a canoeing trip downriver in the mountains, completely isolated, and they stumble across a husband-wife relationship gone bad, possibly. They find her beaten to heck. He's out there with a gun. He might have tried to kill her, we're not sure. Meanwhile, there's a wildfire. There's some other shady characters in the woods. I'm not going to go much more into my thoughts about this one because I did go in depth about it as part of my backlist readathon wrap-up, and I'm going to link that in the cards, so check that out if you haven't already. The next book I read for the backlist readathon is We Should All Be Feminists by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. This is a nonfiction essay that Chimamanda wrote about why every human being on Earth should be a feminist. I think this should be required reading. It is stellar. She gives plenty of really excellent, thought-provoking, and infuriating examples from her own life, and she's such a precise while also being emotionally engaging writer. So if you haven't checked this one out already, please do so. Then for the Backlist Readathon, I read The Hunter by Kerrigan Byrne. This is the second book in a historical romance series. It's about a man who was raised in a prison with his mother, who he watched murdered brutally in front of him. There are a lot of trigger warnings for this. Then he ends up attempting to assassinate, not assassinating, and instead falling for an actress with a young son who some very powerful people want dead. This one was great, and I gave it 4 stars. And then my Backlist Readathon plans went out the window. COVID-19 was happening, very stressful situation, obviously going on for everybody. So instead of reading what I was supposed to read, I then read the next book in Kerrigan Byrne's series, and that was The Highlander. This one's about an ex-soldier with children who he can't really get to behave. He hires a woman to teach them etiquette and school them, but she isn't who she says she is. In fact, she is a member of the aristocracy. She's running from her abusive husband, and she has a lot of trauma to overcome, and their relationship isn't easy. Neither of them can really trust each other initially, and they have a lot to work through before their relationship can really be solid. It's beautiful, and I was really engaged with them and enjoyed this one a lot, and I gave it 4 stars as well. And then I really just totally off track with Backlist Readathon, and in fact read a book that wasn't backlist, wasn't TBR, and that was Down and Dirty by Kendall Ryan. This is a contemporary hockey romance. I really liked it a lot. I gave it 4 stars, and I don't have anything else to say about it. Just go check out my wrap-up from that readathon, and that was the final book I read for the Backlist Readathon. The next 4 books I read in March are books 2 through 5 of the Crossfire series by Sylvia Day. I realized going through self-isolation, with virus spreading, with the hysteria and the chaos and the uncertainty of everything going on around us, all I wanted was comfort reads. And for me, that was romance. And it wasn't just any romance, it was rereads of romance I had enjoyed in the past. That's all I wanted to read, and I very much allowed myself to do that. And so I read this series. I read the first one back in February, and I hadn't really planned on continuing on with the series, but desperate times, desperate measures, all of that. So I picked up book 2 and I banged through the rest of the series to completion. If you don't know anything about these, they are sort of 50 Shades-esque. I think much better written on a technical level. I think she can actually write to some extent, which is more than I can say for E.L. James. But they do deal with 2 characters who both have faced sexual trauma in the past, and so these aren't very lighthearted, but they are very hot, they are very engaging, and they are very dramatic. That is where this series sort of loses me. Over the progression of the series, things get more and more outlandishly dramatic, to the point where our hero, Gideon, has 4 different exes who show up pursuing him, are unbalanced in their pursuit of him, threatening him, blackmailing him, going to extreme lengths because they are so jealous or torn up or hate his new girlfriend so much or whatever. There's a secret marriage, there is a murder. All I can say is it's wildly overdramatic, melodramatic, but I enjoyed every second of it. So if you haven't read these and you're looking for some escapism and you're okay with plenty of adult content, then I would pick up the series. And then the final book I read in March. This was another reread, not a romance. So I am digging myself out of that hole a little bit. And my sister and I actually, since we were trapped in our apartment together, spent last weekend basically laying around doing nothing but listening to the audiobook, our favorite audiobook of all time, for Ready Player One. This is narrated by Will Wheaton. It is fantastic. It is about a boy who, in a desolate future version of our world, only finds joy, only finds hope and escapism from his terrible home life by plugging into the Oasis. It's sort of like a video game on steroids, a virtual reality universe that you can plug into, and most people go to school in the Oasis, go to work in the Oasis, play games in the Oasis, and the creator of the Oasis died many years ago and left his billions to the person who can solve a whole bunch of riddles and find a bunch of clues that he has hidden within the Oasis. But the Oasis is enormous, and Wade has decided to set out and solve these riddles and win Halliday's fortune. So basically we're following him through this adventure the friends he meets along the way. There are villains, there's just a lot of action, and there's so much geek culture and 80s pop culture. And if you're a geek, if you like 80s music or movies, if you like video games, if you like trivia of any kind, this is going to be it for you. We had a blast listening to it. This is probably my third or fourth time listening to that audiobook, and it's just the best. So that's it, everybody. Those are the 12 books I read in March. Considering everything that's going on in the world, I enjoyed all of the books that I read. I hope you guys are staying happy and healthy and reading some great books, and I will catch you guys in the next one. Bye.